afternoon, everyone. Today my team will be analyzing the San Francisco market in comparison to Bloomberg's current markets. The market in San Francisco has a prominent focus on technology. The growing number of technology firms in San Jose and Silicon Valley nearby have increased the need for skilled and educated workers, which exists here in San Francisco. We also see a startup culture increasing the interest in venture capital funds, which produces more financial products for consumption and management. Otherwise, as you can see here, the demographics are very similar to the current markets that they're in. So we still anticipate a focus on the power elites and suburban style groups. We've ranked the demographics here in San Francisco at 8 out of 10.
The radio markets in San Francisco and San Jose, which includes Silicon Valley, are already very strong markets. The radio drive times as people commute to work is very similar, although news consumption in San Francisco and San Jose has historically been higher, and a lot of that's due to the technology in Silicon Valley, the IPOs that are reliant on venture capital from the East Coast. And a key thing to remember here is the 3-hour time difference. So by the time the trading floor opens in New York at 10 a.m., people are already in their offices at 7 a.m. on the West Coast. So they start listening to the radio much earlier in the day. So because of their strong radio listenership and financial and technology information needed by this market, we rated San Francisco an 8 out of 10.
So in order to analyze the commuting times, we studied both the home value heat map as well as the commuting heat map of the San Francisco Bay Area. What we then did was take all of this data and lay them on top of each other to get this beautiful map. Let's be real, this is not far from beautiful. What it really is a big mess. But this exactly describes what the commuting situation is in the San Francisco area. Because just like Boston and New York, affluent people live in areas where commuting times are longer. Arbitron tells us that most people on their commutes actually listen to all news radio stations. So due to this, we rated San Francisco an 8 out of 10 because we think it's a great market for Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, for program analysis, we took the same approach as when analyzing Boston and New York, and we found what we believe is two strong competitors, 1220 AM and 740 AM / 106.9 FM, which is the same radio station. And out of these two radio stations, only one, 1220 AM, is a business news station. The other one is a local CBS news station. With programming such as Money 2.0 and Real Estate 360, 1220 AM programming is more focused on finance and real estate. CBS news station programming is more focused on weather report, entertainment, and local news. Looking into the type of programming these two radio stations have, we believe there's a strong need in the San Francisco market to introduce more programs related in the tech industry.
If Bloomberg wants to enter San Francisco market, its signal must cover the majority of San Francisco, San Jose, and Santa Rosa areas. Already, its primary competitor KDOW has obtained a relative advantage in signal coverage. As you can see from the KDOW's coverage map, all of these three cities are almost in its local coverage area, and the strong signal coverage area is more than 11,200 square miles. Because of this, Bloomberg could potentially be facing a greater challenge when convincing listeners to tune their dials away from the strong KDOW signal and towards Bloomberg. Taking competitor programming and signals into consideration, this section earns a score of 6.
So to get a better understanding of how important each category and market characteristic was, we ranked each of the 4 categories. As you can see, demographic and psychographic composition came in with the heaviest weight, followed by listenership characteristics, daily commute, and at the end, competitors and signal considerations. So we went back and we rated and weighted the New York and Boston markets. And as you can see, understandably, New York is the best market with the highest score of 111. Despite the lower score of 97, Boston, as we all know, has proven to be successful. So that's very important to consider when looking at San Francisco's higher score of 108. So essentially, San Francisco is already looking to be a very promising, great market for Bloomberg to expand into. It's a commuting market with the psychographic and demographic slivers that we're looking to target, and they're already tuned into Wall Street news stations even before Wall Street opens, and so the greatest challenge ahead is going to be convincing those radio listeners to tune their dial away from their current news sources and tune into Bloomberg Radio. we're anxious to speak and offer recommendations on how to do just that in the coming weeks. Thanks.
That's team. Moving team 5.
Okay.
If you're going to San Francisco.
Hi everyone, we are Team 5. I'm Rohit. This is Praveena, Yash, Rhonda and Shyam. And we are here to tell you if Bloomberg should go to San Francisco or not. Now Shyam will continue with market analysis.
So we did a present market analysis as we did last time. So we start again with the age profile, where you can see that the highest population, that is 41%, have an age of more than 45. So again, Bloomberg Radio needs to can target the right people out over here. We also did an income analysis where you can see that the maximum number of population, that is 18.33%, have a household income of more than $150,000. So again, Bloomberg Radio is targeting such people, and which is good for San Francisco market. We also did a income analysis across the 3 cities, where you can see that the average household expenditure and the average savings for San Francisco market is the highest across these 3 cities. That is because the average household income of San Francisco is the highest. We did a mosaic analysis as well, where you can see that flourishing families, booming with confidence, young city solos occupy the top 3 slots in this mosaic profile analysis, and power elite comes 5th in 8.3%. This is a mosaic profile analysis across these 3 cities, where you can see that the power elite population in New York and San Francisco is nearly the same, as well young city solos and booming with confidence, where Bloomberg Radio can target as a secondary market, has also a major concentration in San Francisco market. Moving ahead, the future market analysis will be presented by Praveena.
The 2 important factors to be considered while going into the next market are age and income. As Al mentioned last week, it is important to consider how potential or how sustainable the next potential target market is. So we wanted to see if San Francisco has a percentage change which is positive for age group of 55 and above. And as you could see, there is a positive change in the next 5 years from 2013 to 2018. And for income, like people with 150,000 above, is projected to increase like 23%. So they are power elites. So there is a huge potential in this market in future. Next, Rhonda will be presenting about the radio industry.
So we researched possible competitors that Bloomberg would face if moving to San Francisco, and we came up with the ones listed. All of these are focused on business and news information, and we determined that KDOW, which is the Wall Street Network, would be Bloomberg's biggest competition, as they're solely focused on financial news. Now, both the Wall Street Network and KGO air Bloomberg content right now during the overnight periods, but we're assuming that if Bloomberg would enter this market, that they probably would drop that information, and Bloomberg would be more able to get a better portion of the business and financial news radio listeners. And then other competition, like any other market, would be CD and MP3 players and cell phones. So now Yash will be doing the community analysis.
Thank you. Last week we talked about the commuting analysis in Boston and New York. This time when we compared when we researched in San Francisco, we found that around 2 million people commute to work daily. From that, 70% approximately drive alone. Their preferred listening time is 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Their commuting time is approximately 27 minutes. We see that New York has high numbers compared to Boston and San Francisco because it is densely populated. But let's leave New York behind for a second, because Bloomberg has come to Boston. Compare it to San Francisco, we can see that the numbers are similar, and San Francisco is a potential market. So if you, for a minute, just think about the commuting time and the stock brokers and dealers, because these are the person who will be interested in financial news. If Bloomberg is going in San Francisco, we think that the tower should be somewhere in the financial district, because people who are in the financial district are people who are in the financial services, and the radius shows the commuting time where the people travel from. Now, Rohit will continue the signal.
Thank you, Yash. So for the signal coverage analysis, we tried to compare the heat map of San Francisco, heat map of the home values near San Francisco to that of the signal coverage of the competitors. So you can see the blue patches over there, that represents the home values above 800,000. So if you can see the signal coverage analysis, KDOW, KGO, and KCBS all cover the signal, that particular region, which is of target consumer region. So coming to the matrix, we can see that these are the factors that we consider, and we weighted these factors based on the importance and scored them across the markets, that is Boston, New York, and San Francisco. So for example, we scored New York as 100, which is the baseline for comparison to other markets, that is Boston and San Francisco. And we got New York in the first place, and then San Francisco in the second place, and Boston in the third place. So yes, we should go to San Francisco. Thank you.
And this week we decided to take a deeper look at San Francisco as a market for Bloomberg Radio. First off, let's talk about the Power Elite. Now, the Power Elite is Bloomberg Radio's target market and will always be that. We have to keep that in mind. So the Power Elite is their audience. Bloomberg Radio fits into their lives. They're the ones that are listening to it. So we kept that in mind when we were doing our analysis of San Francisco, and we hope that you do that as well throughout our presentation. So we have constructed a weighted matrix that's comparing New York, San Francisco, and Boston. And based on the scores that we gave, San Francisco had a level of attractiveness that fell in between New York and Boston. Now, by weighing these factors, we chose that the Mosaic concentration and income were more important than the radio competition and commute time. Why? We based this off of two key points that Perry made last week. One being the number of high income. So we were looking at ranges between 250 to 499,000, and then also over 500,000. And the second point was the buying power that the market has. So once we did that, we looked into household incomes between the three cities. And we found that San Francisco has more households that have incomes in these ranges than Boston. So what does that mean? San Francisco and its Power Elite demographic have more money to spend than Boston, where Bloomberg Radio already is.
So as far as U.S. listenership is concerned, Arbitron tells us that San Francisco is the #4 radio city in the United States. That ranks 6 spots ahead of Boston. So that tells us, all else being equal, Bloomberg would be happy, if they're happy in Boston, moving to San Francisco. However, we know all else isn't equal, so it was important for us to analyze the competition that's currently in the San Francisco market. To do that, we found all the radio stations that are currently in San Francisco and looked at their format. Those that didn't have a similar format to San Francisco, or to Bloomberg, we automatically eliminated. From there, we took what was left and looked at their content. Again, those that weren't similar to Bloomberg, we eliminated again. What we had left, we analyzed their signal strength, and those with the competitive signal strength, we kept. From there, we identified the top 3 stations, which we think are going to be Bloomberg's main competition. All of them have a very similar format, very similar content, and very competitive signal strength. And after that, we identified 4 stations we thought were maybe lesser competitors. Their format was similar, but their content was not the same. It wasn't the financial market and constant business focus.
All right, Arbitron stated that the average commute time into the city was 27.4 minutes. And they also stated that most commuters are leaving their house between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. However, as we stated last week, this is not a good, accurate estimation of the commute time because it doesn't take into consideration traffic. And as Ali stated before, we need to remember that we're focusing on the Power Elite. So we took cities from Forbes' 2012 list of most expensive zip codes, and then we went to Google Maps and computed the directions between these cities in San Francisco for 7:30 a.m. Western time. This generates an estimated commute time for the traffic that they are going to be sitting in, which proves, and we learn what we already know, that they're going to be in the car longer than expected and that they have more time to listen to Bloomberg Radio.
So in order to determine the radio signal strength needed to satisfy the San Francisco market, we decided to look at our target market concentration. So what we found out is that Power Elite is mostly concentrated in the northeast of San Francisco, as well as affluent areas in the south, east, and north. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that our signal needs to be strong enough to cover this entire area, which is approximately a 55-mile radius. Well, in order to validate this, we decided to compare this with our potential competitors' radio signal strength. Well, what we observed is that the numbers are pretty comparable.
All right, so let's change our point into a question. Is San Francisco a good fit for Bloomberg Radio? If we look back at the weighted matrix that we put out, San Francisco fell between New York City and Boston in terms of the actual quality of that, and so the number was between those two. And so it would be good in that sense. If we look at the actual competition, it's a little bit stiffer than New York because there are 3 stations that have direct competition to Bloomberg Radio. And then there's 4 additional stations that may take some listeners. So that's a possibility. If we look at the commute time, it is very similar to Boston and New York City. So that's more potential ears there for Bloomberg Radio. And then if we finally look at the signal, if they offer a similar coverage radius than their near competitors, they should be fine in terms of that. So, using Boston as a benchmark, is San Francisco a good fit for Bloomberg Radio? We say yes. Thank you.
How was everyone this afternoon? Today for our analysis, thank you. I'm doing well, thank you for asking. For our analysis, we created a matrix of weighted metrics that allow us to compare New York, Boston, and San Francisco. These metrics were market size, which we weighted at 5%, population characteristics of those markets at 25%, commuting information at 30%, and income in the markets at 40%. And for each of these categories, we'll display the top-ranked city by highlighting it on the right-hand side of the slide to make it a little easier. So as we mentioned last week, the number of listeners a radio station has is a very important measure of success for that radio station. Therefore, bigger cities they have a larger potential for retaining a greater number of listeners as well as acquiring more new listeners. And as you can see, San Francisco is between Boston and New York in this regard, with New York coming in on top.
So, 3 areas capture the key attributes of Bloomberg Radio's current target market. In terms of both age distribution and white-collar population proportion, San Francisco comes ahead in the rankings. Last week, we touched on the importance of the power elites for Bloomberg Radio's business model. In this ranking, San Francisco comes second after New York and ahead of Boston, capturing 8% of the power elite bracket. Out of the 3 cities, we believe we found out of the matrix that the best match would be San Francisco down there.
So according to Arbitron, New York has the most commuting time and San Francisco has the least. So as we mentioned last week, Ibis World has a report that cites that the total vehicle miles are the key economic driver of radio broadcasting industry. So that's because more mileage means more time spent in the car, and that leads to more time dedicated listen to the radio. So we also think that driving alone is important because that is greater potential that people will turn on the radio instead of distracted by others. And San Francisco ranked second in this category. So overall, we think that time spent in car is more important than both the distance traveled and whether or not the commuters are driving alone. So therefore, we weighted average time heavier than the other factors in this category. So that makes New York stand out in commuting.
So I think everyone in this room has made it abundantly clear over the last couple of weeks that advertising is important. Bloomberg should care about advertising. I think we also all agree that advertising revenue is the greatest among those who have a large amount of disposable income. Well, this week we did things a little bit differently. We looked and evaluated how income in order to get a more quantitative picture of who has the most disposable income. So what we did this week was we measured 4 main criteria: average annual household expenditure, cost of living, income above $150,000, and households among the top 5% of incomes in the United States. Why did we do this? It was all to sum up to 3 main categories. One, we wanted to know who made the most money. We wanted to know who was spending the most money, and where were people making the most money. So interestingly, New York actually ranked the lowest. on 3 of these categories and ranked comparable to Boston on the 4th. Overwhelmingly, San Francisco was the best choice for consumers as far as disposable income and cost of living went. So San Francisco had the highest number of people making $150,000 annually or more. They also were in the top 5% of income households in the United States, with 13% of these households living within San Francisco. The latter statistic, that's not really that surprising because the cost of living in San Francisco was the lowest among the 3 cities, and even, which makes sense with all of that, is San Franciscans also tend to spend the most. Lower cost of living, higher income, they are going to spend more. So what does this all mean? That while San Franciscans look on picture to be able to spend a lot of money, they do spend more. So advertisers should target them.
All right. In conclusion, while population size is important, New York was the clear winner there. Bloomberg realistically is only considering the nation's largest metros, so we only carried that weight at 5%. Next, we considered population characteristics such as age, household type, and occupation type as 25% of our matrix. These characteristics help define Bloomberg Radio's current target consumer. Cities with higher proportions of such characteristics would likely be a better match. San Francisco was the winner here. Our most important factor was income at 40% due to its impact on disposable income and thus the potential to drive advertising revenue. San Francisco outperformed every area in this category. After weighing the factors of our different criteria in the matrix, which we attached to your handout, San Francisco came out ahead of both Boston and New York as a match for Bloomberg Radio.
20% of all venture capitalist activity across the United States happens in San Francisco. Is San Francisco a viable market for Bloomberg Radio to explore next? Our research suggests yes. My name is Remy Cofield. This is Eddie, Peter, Jeff, and Ahmed. As I said before, here's the concentration of venture capitalist activity across the United States. We wanted to look into this a little bit further. By starting with awareness and interest, we did an analysis of Google Trends to find the relative. We did an analysis of Google Trends to find the keywords in order to gauge the relative interest and awareness of our target market within our target market. We found that the popularity of certain trends were more popular to certain locations. As you can see, San Francisco, the most popular and closest to San Francisco is venture capital, while the farthest and least relative to San Francisco is the Bloomberg terminal. However, the overall relativity of these terms to San Francisco is only second to New York, meaning that Bloomberg Radio does not have the necessary name recognition as of yet, but the topics that Bloomberg Radio discusses on a daily basis are those which would be more compelling to San Francisco as a whole.
So in our consumer analysis, we looked at 3 evaluations that we determined were key to determine the potential of this market. The first of all, looking at the consumer segments that we determined previously last week and in the previous segments, American Royalty, Young City Souls, and Kids and Cabernet. And the population shows that San Francisco is second by market size, second to New York. Our second evaluation were owner-occupied houses with value of over $500,000. And we believe this is a relative factor indicator of wealth. San Francisco is number 1 in that sense. Our third evaluation is more direct, number of millionaires in each market. New York clearly wins it all, but San Francisco comes second with 147,000 millionaires.
Here, the right image shows the wealthy areas in San Francisco. And on the other hand, the left image shows the average commuting time reported by millionaires in San Francisco. Both images together suggest that actually the wealthy people from wealthy areas do not travel as much as average people.
So with our programming and listenership analysis, we took a slightly different approach than we did in the past week. That was due to the fact that Bloomberg is not currently in San Francisco like it was in Boston, New York. So we performed a gap analysis. We identified the 4 competitors that we deemed most important for Bloomberg to be aware of, and then 5 content topics that we thought were most relevant to the population. You can see that the darker squares represent where there's ample coverage of topics, and the lightest squares represent where their topic or where the coverage is lacking. So with that, we identified that venture capitalism and technology are both very important topics to potential listeners and are topics that actually aren't covered right now in the market. With that, if Bloomberg were to enter the San Francisco market, catering their content to those topics might provide the best opportunity for them.
So in order to analyze the attractiveness of markets for Bloomberg Radio, we created a matrix of factors based on the potential for Bloomberg Radio. Significant factors included the presence of owner-occupied homes that were valued over $500,000, venture capital activity, as well as overall wealth in the area. Weaker factors included the current interest level, commuting times actually, and the competition in the market. In order to arrive at the matrix that you see here, what we did was actually weighted factors for the relevance to Bloomberg Radio, and then we also weighted them in terms of their strength in the particular markets. So for example, for San Francisco here, home values, we gave it a relevance factor of 8 and a strength of 10, and therefore 80 points contributed to the overall index factor for San Francisco for home values. Now keep in mind that you have low ones like commuting time, because the wealthy people from the wealthy areas are actually not commuting for a very long time. So while wealth and in these areas, as seen by big name people like Larry Ellison and also like Marissa Mayer, they're important and they're representative of the people who live here. However, we need to focus in on people like Marissa Mayer's husband, who's actually an angel investor. Okay? These are people who have their eyes on the future. So in summary, based on our presentation here, in comparing the markets, Bloomberg Radio should go into San Francisco, but only if they are focused on becoming the most trusted source for venture capital and technology news. Thank you.
Good afternoon, chaps. We're Team 7. This is our second presentation, and we're going to talk to you about penetrating the San Francisco market. I'm Hassan, that's Divakar, Gur, Diego, and Sandipan.
Thank you, Hassan. We have been asked to analyze the San Francisco market and find if it is feasible for Bloomberg Radio to venture into San Francisco. And based on our research, we recommend Bloomberg to venture into San Francisco. Our team will breeze you through the presentation. Gur will explain you the market on the map. Diego will explain you the factors we considered, and Sandeepan will explain you the rationale behind our recommendation, and Hassan will conclude with the recommendation.
For the best ride in and out of the city, this is how Bloomberg Radio describes itself. The screenshot is the map of San Francisco, and point A is the financial district. As you can see, the downtown map shows the income distribution, and yellow areas are the wealth where wealthy people are living. When we zoom out from the map, you can see that there are many more yellow areas outside of the city. And these are the people who are commuting into the city they're commuting down into downtown from outside areas. And these are the people we're mainly focusing on. And this is why we picked the metropolitan area of San Francisco. Now, Diego will talk about the criteria we picked.
So as Mr. Almayer said last time, we should not only focus on New York, Boston, or San Francisco, we should also focus on the metro areas. This is where, as Gert showed you, most of the wealthy people are living and where the people are commuting. So we came up with 4 basic criteria, which I'm going to describe further on. We compared the U.S. metropolitan cities to the San Francisco metro area, Boston metro area, New York metro area. So our first comparison was as you can see, the San Francisco metro area, 19.6% of people earn more than $150,000. That's more than in New York and in Boston. Another factor, the number of households. As you can see, overwhelmingly, New York has a bigger population, thus having more people earning more than $150,000.
Disposable income, that's another critical factor which we wish to consider. As you can see, people in San Francisco tend to have a higher disposable income than the national average and more than in New York and in Boston. Another statistic, we focus on the people that travel in car alone and most importantly that commute 20 or more minutes. As you can see, this stat for the San Francisco metro area is also bigger than the one for New York metro area and Boston metro area. Furthermore, we try to focus our target population on people between the ages of 35 and 65. As you can see, it's also higher in San Francisco metropolitan area than in both Boston and New York. Now, Sandy Pan's going to talk about the matrix we created and why we believe San Francisco is a good target to go into.
So all of you must be wondering what those numbers are. Those numbers are nothing but just a means to define the market attractiveness of the 3 metros that we chose to Bloomberg, and basically how we came up with those. So we standardized the data that we just saw and came up with an index scale and also weighted them according to what we thought was more important. We found that disposable income was the most important factor because that's how we want to target those people who want to go and invest. And as you can see, New York tops out of the 3, and it's way above all of them. This is just to state the fact that New York has such a huge amount of people who earn more than 150K, and that's probably one of the reasons why Bloomberg has been so successful in that region. However, if you see Boston and San Francisco does better than Boston in each and every respect. So San Francisco, the bottom line of the story is like San Francisco may not be as good as New York, but it definitely has a much better potential than Boston. And I'll pass on to Hassan to conclude the presentation.
All right, that, chaps, is a Bugatti Veyron. It was created specifically for a niche market. The analogy I'm trying to draw is that Bloomberg is very much the same. You won't see a Bugatti everywhere in the same way you won't see Bloomberg everywhere. Very much like one another, there is absolutely no alternative. And we created a formula which my chaps have just explained to you, which justifies why San Francisco works so well. Another way of explaining it, very simply, is in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Most of the time, not everyone gets to enjoy the privilege of living in the top triangle. We think that Bloomberg should aim for markets where the population has the disposable income which enables them to live comfortably in that top triangle. Therefore, Bloomberg then becomes a good means of information for them to digest, which unfortunately not everybody can digest. So our final suggestion is that San Francisco is indeed feasible for Bloomberg to penetrate. Thank you.
Anybody not have a score sheet? You don't have to. Why don't I do those while the other why don't I help you out while you get time? Okay, who still needs a Chicago sheet?
Good afternoon. Today we are here to tell you a tale of two cities, and we are Team 2. When I say Tale of Two Cities, it's not the novel written by Charles Dickens back in 1859. It's more recent. It's related something to do with Bloomberg Radio. Moving on, first chapter of our book. We have pretty much seen a lot about New York City and Boston in the past couple of weeks. We have beaten that to death. We have seen the target market, competitors, income range, expenditures, and everything. As a part of this week's assignment, we were to look into Chicago. When we were doing our research, we went a step ahead and we had a look at one more city, the metropolitan area of DC. And that's what we're going to talk about. And these question marks will be filled up towards the end of our presentation. Now I'd like to call upon Amitav, who's going to continue this tale.
So we began our story with Chicago and DC. Let's compare them side by side. When we look at Chicago, we have a large population concentrated within the metro area, which results in a lot of traffic, but only within the area. In addition, it has 6 direct competitors to Bloomberg Radio within the city. When you compare this to Washington, D.C., you have fewer people within the D.C. area, but a lot of people traveling all the way from Baltimore and from Virginia and Maryland. So you have the second highest commuter time in the country coming in at DC. Also, there is only one direct competitor to Bloomberg Radio. When you look at the signal and commuter times, again, like I said, it's more spread out for DC. We actually had to zoom it out on that. But if you look at the lines around the cities, they are the signals for the most listened to stations in the cities. And you can see that DC actually has a much better signal within the target area. Ariel is going to talk about the characteristics of our target.
By now we know that Bloomberg's target audience has been determined to be these two. They need to include people with high incomes, high buying power, long commuting times, be highly educated, and be between the ages of 35 and 65. We kept this in mind when we did our side-by-side comparisons of DC and Chicago, which Natalia will delve into further in order to complete our matrix that we showed you earlier.
So our data showed that actually 21% of the DC population makes more than 150,000 per year, while in Chicago this number is only 11%. And also we found out that Washington residents, they spend on average 35% more than residents of Chicago. Also, we found out that on average, each household in Washington, D.C. has more cars than in Chicago. Also, as before, Amitav mentioned, Washington, D.C. is the second largest commute time nationwide. And what it makes people to listen to the radio more while they are staying in the car. Also, where do those people commute? Our data showed that more than 23% of residents of Washington work in financial works, including economic policy. While in Chicago, only just 15% are involved in economic and financial industries. And here you will ask, why is it so? I don't know, maybe because Washington is smarter. Our data showed that 25% of population of Washington, D.C. have a bachelor's degree, and about 23% of residents have graduate degree. While in Chicago, those numbers are only 23 and 11. And on top of that, D.C. has more residents in the age of 35 and 65 years. And let us not forget to point out that according to the recent Forbes article, Richmond, Virginia and Northern Virginia were named 2 of the top 10 places taking jobs away from Wall Street. You'll ask, where is Chicago in this list? No, Chicago wasn't there.
Thank you. So my team did a great job of giving you a side-by-side comparison of Chicago and DC. And here you can see them matched up next to Boston and New York. We weighted everything equally, and here are the raw data. And you can see that actually DC comes out on top. However, we'll let you be the decider.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian. These are my teammates Yi, Karen McGorge, as well as Aaron, who's under the weather. For this, we chose our target audience as the Power Elite group, comprised of the top 6 mosaics. That's a group that Bloomberg has targeted in the past and wants to continue to target. As you can see, Chicago fits in nicely between Boston and New York in this category, with over 500,000 people. Moving on to Chicago commuting population. Chicago has a large amount of people that commute solo at 71%. And interestingly, DuPage County, Will County, and Lake County are 3 of the top 65 wealthiest counties in the country. So in terms of the commuters coming from the Chicago suburbs, a large amount of them commute solo, and they're the wealthy folks that we're targeting as well. And Yi will look at competitive analysis.
Thank you.
So as usual, we pick up our competitors specifically from the news segments. From this slide, we can see there are 8 general news stations in New York, 4 in Boston, and 9 in Chicago. When turned to business news station, Boston is the only city out of these 3 with 2 existing news stations here, of course excluding Bloomberg. By take a further look at the Chicago market, we find there are 3 strongest competitors here, Cumulus, Tribune, and the CBS Radio. So all of them established their station during the starting of 1990s. In another word, they accumulated a considerable listener database for almost 20 years. From technical aspect, we find they have similar signal coverage map, which can be used as a benchmark for Bloomberg. Now next, Karen will introduce you the revenue performance of one of our competitors.
Last week, Alan Myers pointed out that Bloomberg changed its perspective on radio stations from a marketing to a business orientation. And this puts advertisement revenues for radio stations at a much more important point. And one source of revenues for radio stations, if not the only one, is the advertisements. To make sense of this, what we did was to look at a similar radio station and how it does in Chicago and New York from an advertisement revenue perspective. On CBS, Columbia Broadcasting Systems, operates in pretty much all the cities that Bloomberg operates at the moment and wants to operate. And in their top 2 stations in Chicago made $45.7 million in 2011 and $88.7 million for New York. Interestingly, these numbers are almost in line with the population differences of these 2 cities. And now Garish will conclude our analysis.
Thanks, Kevin. To conclude the presentation, I would like to highlight the matrix weightage table we created, what we think are the key criteria for Bloomberg's success in any geographic location within the United States. And from the table, it's evident that the most favorable, New York remains the most favorable market for Bloomberg, followed by Chicago, and then followed by Boston. To wrap it up, Chicago is one of the best radio markets in the country where radio industry generates substantial revenues. There is no direct competition in terms of business radios apart from satellite and internet radios. A lot of people drive alone in Chicago, and there's a good presence of the target group which we selected, that is Power Elite. So according to us, Chicago is a favorable market for Bloomberg to explore. Thank you.
All right. Hi, we're Team 6. So you want to know whether Chicago is a viable option for Bloomberg Radio. You want to know how its market compares to New York's and Boston's. Well, with our criteria evaluation, analysis, and scoring matrix, we can tell you yes, but. Stay tuned for why yes and why but. And now I'll pass it over to Ali, who will talk about our evaluation criteria.
Thank you, Jess. So we evaluated Chicago as the same way as we did for New York and Boston, using 5 main criteria. Our first criteria is commuting time, because that's where the target market will be most reachable. Our second criteria is the availability and strength of radio signals. Our third is the lack of competition in the area. Our fourth is whether or not the city has good listenership. And our fifth and final criteria is a concentration of the target markets because they are attractive to advertisers. Now I'll pass it off to Lauren and Kaylee, who will do the analysis of Chicago.
All right, to start off our analysis, we looked first at the presence of the target market in the city of Chicago. These people are present in Chicago, as you can see, particularly in the suburbs, which is good for Bloomberg Radio because these are the people who will be commuting into the city. These are the people who have high income and are interested in financial news. Moving on, we look at their commuting time. So people in Chicago are driving for about a half an hour one way, not including traffic in our calculations, and about 3/4 of them are driving to work alone, making them prime time for Bloomberg Radio.
Next, we looked at listenership. Chicago is the #3 radio market in the country based on population, which makes it a really strong candidate for any news station. But more importantly for Bloomberg, the people of Chicago are using the radio to get their news. All news is the top format within the Chicago area, which could be a great fit for Bloomberg's business news talk format. Moving on to the availability of radio signals, unfortunately, when we looked, we weren't able to find any available radio signals within Chicago, which could present a problem for Bloomberg, depending on the availability of other options such as leasing. And then finally, looking at the competition, like I already mentioned, Chicago has a really large radio market. There's 23 existing news talk radio stations. 3 of them, WBEZ, WCSJ, and WLS, air finance and stock market information as part of their regular programming schedule, but none of them follow a strictly business talk format like Bloomberg, which would mean that they have no direct competition. And now Khaled will look at our matrix.
So as we have discussed so far the 5 main criteria, we have ranked them as we consider the importance of the criteria to evaluate the market for Bloomberg Radio. We have ranked presence of the target market as the highest because we have considered this as the most important criteria. We have put 25% of the weight here. On the other hand, competition in the market, we have considered it as the least weight. That's why we have put only 15% of the weight here. According to our analysis and research, we have marked the cities in red, green, or yellow. If the city seems to be performing very well or well, then we have marked them as green. On the average, we have marked them as yellow. And if the city seems to be performing as below average or weak, we have marked them as red. In the next step, we have tried to quantify them based on the national averages and at the same time based on the rankings published by different sources. For an example, if you look at the listenership in the 3rd column, you can see, according to our Arbitron radio market ranking, we have found that Chicago is ranked at number 3, New York is ranked as number 1, and Boston is ranked as number 10. So based on our matrix, we found out that New York is definitely leading the board, but at the same time, Boston and Chicago is performing at the same level. Now I will invite Ali to conclude our analysis.
Thank you, Khaled. So, based on our research and matrix, we have concluded that yes, pending the availability of a signal, Bloomberg should consider expanding to Chicago. Why yes? Because based on our research, we believe that the Chicago station will do at least as well as the Boston station currently does. Why but? Because it's pending the cost and barriers to entry of available signals.
This is Team 3. My name's Preet McCarr, and we'll be presenting to you today Chicago market analysis for Bloomberg Radio's ongoing consideration for a target market. This is the agenda, what we'll be covering off, and I'll be handing over to Miriam to start off with this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll be analyzing the market. We found out that Chicago is ranked number 3 in the list of top radio markets, and New York is number 1, LA is number 2. It's our expectation that 40% of the population is in the is our target market because these people are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and these people are young and they are highly educated and they are ambitious and they need to be financially savvy, so that's why they will be listening to Bloomberg Radio. We also found out that these people own about 90% of them own at least one vehicle, so they'll be listening to the Bloomberg Radio while they're driving, and only 11% earn more than 150Ks, and in Boston and New York it's 14 and 15% respectively. We also analyzed the home values in Chicago, and on average we found out that the house prices are less than in other metro areas like Boston and New York. Now, Kevin will continue.
Based on the Mosaic demographics, we found that there are 3 groups that comprise around 51% of the households in Chicago, The top three would be cultural connections, young city solos, and significant singles. The remaining groups, that is the remaining 10 groups, comprise the remaining 49% of the households. So apart from what the others say, I believe, or we believe, that the top two target market customers for Bloomberg should be from these top three. Also, if you look at the mode of transport of these top three groups, you would see that around 40% of each of the groups travel using a car. The remaining 60% of each of the groups use other means of transport. So we believe that Bloomberg should target the remaining 60% using other channels of communication. It could be online internet, or it could be via podcasting. I'm going to hand it over to Liz to talk about.
It's my turn. Sorry. I'll be covering up the commuting time analysis. So I'm just going to bring up some quick trends that we found based on our research, particularly for Chicago market. Average commuting time is about 28.1 minutes, which basically gives you a half hour going right from where you live to Chicago downtown. 80% of this commuting population is actually using private vehicles, whether it's your own car or whether they're carpooling. 71% of that commuting population is actually traveling between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m., which is a 4-hour window. And that is very specific because we need to understand what time frame we have to target these customers who are potentially our target market. Of course, not everyone is listening to Bloomberg Radio or business news in general. Looking at the heat map of Chicago, going around 180 degrees almost. 3 directions. What we're looking at is a 23-mile radius, which tells us our target population is traveling around 23-mile radius, moving away from Chicago downtown. So that would potentially be our target market. Now, one thing we need to point out is that we may potentially be relying on these statistics to identify a target market, but the idea is to find a profitable target market, not just a target market. I'll be handing over to Liz to continue on. Thank you.
So according to our research, we found there is like 23 news radios within Chicago listening rate distance, and only 19 of them they locate their demographic in the people above 35 years old. So only 6 of these radios they have business news programming. So these 6 radios are exactly Bloomberg's potential competitors in Chicago market. But here is a thing. All of these 6 radios, they don't have the business news programming during the 4 hours window. So most of them, they just like broadcast their business news during in the afternoon or during the afternoon. So I mean, if Bloomberg entered Chicago market, it will be the only one who has the business news radio programming during the 4 hours window. Thanks. I pass to Sam.
Thank you, Liz. Carrying on, these quick signal analysis of the 6 potential competitors that Liz mentioned earlier. You can see the signal types, basic power level of each station. These are things that Bloomberg will need to consider when they're looking to purchase a license in the Chicago market. Randomly selected an AM and FM station about average signal strength and show you their coverage. The red line, of course, is what we care about as the local coverage area in these markets. So to wrap up, we had our market analysis with our metro area, our 3 target demographic groups, which are different than what we had considered with Boston and New York, commuting trends, programming, and our signal analysis. Now, we don't feel that we have enough data yet to make a conclusion that Chicago is a market that Bloomberg should be moving into. There are many financial considerations that need to be reviewed before we would make that recommendation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Here is Team 4. Thank you for your patience. Today we will analyze the Bloomberg and the Bloomberg in New York, Chicago, and Boston. First, we have the 7 criteria, and then we assign each of them a percentage based on their importance to Bloomberg. And then we set the New York as the baseline, which is 100 points for two reasons. First, the 7 criteria are different from each other. They have different baselines, so it's hard to compare them vertically. And the second reason is that we have already known that New York is an ideal place for Bloomberg. So if we want to know the Chicago or the Boston's situation, it's fair enough to compare them with the New York City. Let's move on to program.
So for the program analysis, we first want to talk about the direct competitors for these cities. For Boston, there are 3 direct competitors which also providing business news. And for New York, this number reduced to 1. And for Chicago, the number is 0. And but Chicago also, at the same as Boston and New York, all face some kind of indirect competition, such as newspapers, TVs, mobile devices, and magazines.
As we can see here, all of the 3 cities have higher than average commuting time. New York has the 3rd largest commuting time in the country. Chicago is number 10 and Boston is 20. Something interesting that we found was that the commuters who drive to work alone in Chicago is the highest, and it's much bigger than the one in New York. Another important thing that we found was that the number of commuters in Chicago is 2 times bigger than the one in Boston. And just looking at the commuting time, we can assume that Chicago is a much better market than New York. Another important factor is that radio stations has to consider when they enter a new market is the number of potential listeners. And as we can see, this number for Chicago would probably be big because it has 2 times bigger population than Boston. But the question here is, are these people going to be interested in the Bloomberg radio format? And the answer is probably yes, because the answer is probably yes because people in the highest ranked radio stations in Chicago are news radio stations compared to Boston, where people like to listen to sports.
So here comes our metrics and conclusions. Compared with these 3 cities and by these 7 criteria, New York, as you can see, New York is as the lead because of its high income buying power index and the population density, especially the buying power index. As you can see, the buying power index is 3 times of that of Boston and 2.3 times that of Chicago. And concentrate on Chicago only, you can see that buying power index is 43, and in Boston is 32. It's slightly higher, and the density is very, very slightly smaller than that of Boston, and the income level is a lot less than that of Boston. So it informs to the fact that it might be the buying power majorly comes from the middle class in Chicago area. Other factors like commuting time, education, occupation, and competition and age, they are probably in the same statistic environment, and we taken another extra factor into consideration, its stability of economy, because we found that Chicago is now undergoing the fiscal budget deficit. So you might consider in the future they may undergoing some instability of economy. So here comes our scores for these 3 cities. And if you want to expand your business in Chicago, you may take extra consideration to that. Thank you.
our slide. Good evening all, my name is Kachi, and these are my teammates, Adam Sparling, Kashyap Gandhi, Chi Ying, Marcus, and Adam Hammond. Today we're going to be talking about whether Bloomberg should go into the Chicago market. We're going to divide our presentation into the various criteria we're going to use for our metrics, and they're weighted based on their importance, and each city is given a score of 1 to 5, on 5 being the most important. And I'll hand it over to Adam to talk about our multi-graphics.
Thanks, Kachi. So to determine whether Chicago is a feasible market for Bloomberg Radio to enter, we took a step back, and we looked at both Boston and New York with their demographic and psychographic profile that we looked at last week. We particularly focused on the socioeconomic status of these two cities with household income of over $250,000. As you can see, Chicago actually ranks third with just over 3% of their population making that income level. However, if you look at the second piece of this, the power elite, Chicago finds himself in the middle with over 7% of their population in the power elite. So in order to break this deadlock, we went and looked at other factors, such as what percentage of their population works in the financial industry. It was a clear indicator that Chicago actually beats out Boston in this category. Therefore, we put them second, giving them a 3 in our overall matrix. I'm going to pass it over to Kashyap, who's going to talk about competition.
Thank you. So in terms of the competition, first, we just wanted to compare the number of AM, FM radio stations in the 3 places. So as it turns out, Chicago has 14, Boston has 7, and New York has 15. So as we can see is that there's a lot of competition over here, not as much as it is in New York, but more than what it is in Boston. That's why Chicago is ranking somewhere in between. Another important thing which we think is to be considered was that in this case we did not consider satellite radio, we did not consider podcasts, because those are 2 things which are practically going to be available in all the 3 geographical regions. As it turns out from the competition, Chicago's in the middle, and hence we give it a 3. Now I'll pass it on to Chi to talk about the signal strength.
Thank you, Kashyap. Since we already know the competition in Chicago City might be fierce, we take an example from the Bloomberg's most potential competitors, which is CBS. It is the most popular radio station and the second place in overall. And we can see the signal is strong enough to cover the entire areas, not only Chicago City. And with only 1 radio tower. What does that tell us? For first of all, of course, if you want to be as competitive as CBS radio, you at least need to have a signal as strong as that. And then, with only 1 radio tower, the cost to enter this market could be low, which makes Chicago a favorable location for Bloomberg. Thank you. For the Marcus to do the commuter analysis.
Thank you. So, Chicago loves cars. At least that's what it looks like when you look at the numbers. I mean, people who drive alone, people who carpool, amount for 80% of the people who commute every day. End of story? Not really. There's also 2 million individual rides on public transportation every day, which is a number that Bloomberg cannot simply ignore if they choose to go into that market. So how do those numbers actually add up? There's a lot of people in Chicago who take their car, drive the car to a commuter rail or a subway station, and get into public transportation from there on. This is really great for Bloomberg. A great chance to go into the market if they can offer door-to-door coverage. Just imagine someone at home getting into the car, turning into Bloomberg Radio, driving the car to the station, getting out, taking out their headphones, putting them in, and continuing the coverage with the Bloomberg app. This is really seamless and a really good point for Bloomberg. And now Adam's going to wrap it up for us.
Thanks, Marcus. So at the bottom of our slides previously, you've seen all 4 of the categories that we have selected, as well as the percentage that we weighted each. And what we did was added them all up, got their weighted totals, and it appears that Chicago is actually the best choice for Bloomberg Radio. But with this specific table, there's one problem, and that's with multi-graphics and commuters, we just looked at percentages and didn't look at the hard numbers yet. And that doesn't quite tell the whole story. For example, if Bloomberg Radio decided to go into the greatest town in the world of Fayetteville, Arkansas, it could get 100% of the people there and only have 80,000 people. That's as much as 1/2 of 1% in New York City. So what we decided to do was rerun the table with the nominal numbers, or with the actual numbers in there as well, and weight each of those 50%, because we want to have an influence and we want to reach a large number of people. So then we had our final weighted total, with New York in the lead and Chicago close behind, well ahead of Boston. So therefore, right now, we want to say yes, that Chicago is a great market for Bloomberg to enter, but we'd also love to do a little bit more research to find out more.
That lions can jump higher than the Sears Tower. Turns out the Sears Tower can't jump very high.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Well, now that everyone's paying attention. So we are Team 1, and we decided to do our, well, we didn't decide, but we were told to do our comparative market analysis on the great city of Chicago for Bloomberg Radio, which is also known as the Windy City, or of course, the home of the deep dish pizza. So we started building our whole metro market analysis based on just a few key things that we thought were important to Bloomberg, such as metro area population and income over 200,000. And like the last group said, we didn't really feel that percentages told the whole picture, so we decided to change it into the absolute numbers. We just really wanted to find out how many ears and wallets are in each city. That was the main goal. We also decided that New York is going to be the top of our range, and Boston is going to be the bottom, and any city that kind of falls in between is probably a good city to look into. We think this is important because New York is making a profit. They're really, the top of Bloomberg, and Boston is just breaking even, so we want every city to at least do that.
So as Al mentioned, the amount of wealth of a city is really important for Bloomberg because it determines whether or not people will respond to the advertising that they air. So our measurement for the wealth was the buying power index, and we used New York as a standard. So we used New York's median salary in addition to their cost of living to get a BPI of 1 for New York, which we compared Chicago and Boston to. In order to get the BPI of Chicago and Boston, we used their respective median salaries in addition to the amount of money required to match the New York City buying power. That gave us a BPI of about 1.6 for both cities, with Chicago being slightly higher. What this means is that for every dollar spent in those cities, you can buy about 1.6 more than you can in New York, which is a really good sign in terms of the amount of money that people have to spend on things like advertising. So because the amount of wealth is so important, we use the BPI as a number in our matrix, which we later added weights to.
So as we all know at this point, the majority of people who do listen to radio will do so in their car. So it's important for Bloomberg to be in a market where people are driving to work and doing so by themselves. And as you can see in Chicago, about 71% of people do both. And also, we found out that Chicago is number 3 in the country in terms of metro population. So when comparing these two facts, we concluded that there would be a strong listenership and base in this market. And then moving back to our matrix, we removed the population totals because we applied the percentages to the totals to give us a better way of comparing all 3 of the cities. And Levi is going to go into greater detail.
So as Mike just mentioned, we didn't feel like we needed to use the metro population anymore. We'd already distributed it throughout the rest of the numbers. So what we were left with is our final matrix of all the important factors. Moving forward, the next step is to apply weights to those. The most important thing we thought was the number of incomes over $200,000. That's coming from what Al told us last week, what Bloomberg, we were reported from Bloomberg the very first week of this class, and moved down from there, with commuting alone being another big one. We also wanted to normalize. We have different units here, so we had to normalize everything. We set New York to 1, and then divided the rest of the cities by New York to get values for each of those, applied all the weights out, did some addition, got our abacus, did all that. New York comes in at a 100, right where it should be. Boston's at 53, which tells us that's the break-even point. And then Chicago's comfortably in the middle at 72. But before you sit down with a nice slice of deep dish, you gotta wait for Omar. He's got a little kicker for us.
All right, so we look at the competitive analysis. Chicago, the greater Chicago area has about 80 radio stations. We cut anything that wasn't talk or news related. We get down to a smaller number. Then we dug deeper and analyzed each and every radio station. We eventually found that there's 5 radio stations that are competing with Bloomberg. But the most important is BBC. Another factor we really looked into is available signals. The FCC, as of right now, is not accepting any applications for other radio stations. So that leaves Bloomberg with two options. Looking at silent radios, which there's one, and they lease it, or buy a smaller radio station and use its assets for Bloomberg's advantage. So to conclude everything, there is obstacles that Bloomberg is going to have to overcome before they're able to have taste of that deep dish pizza. Thank you.
What we expect for next week. Let's talk a little bit about today. Regarding your presentation skills, I thought that they are continuing to improve dramatically. If there were two comments that I might make where there were some similarities of weaknesses, only two. One is for those of you who do not have voices quite as strong as some of the other members of your group, please remember this is your friend. And so all you have to do is to move this over or conversely move over to it. So that would be number one. Let's try to improve the fact that everybody's audio is going to be at the same level. And that for just a very few of you will take some adjustments. The second thing is in a way very connected with the audio, and that is looking at the slides. All I can tell you is that having read all of the information that you have put at the bottom of the slides on the handouts, it's quite clear that you know exactly what you're going to say. You don't, in a way, even have to memorize that. If you were just to read it, which is not our first choice. Our first choice is for you to obviously feel comfortable with it, for you to be looking at the audience at all times. But regardless of whether you do that or not, there's no reason for you to ever look at the slides. When you look at the slides, you lose contact eye to eye. When you look at the slides, we can't hear you. So would you please remember those two things when you present next week? Those are the only possible comments that I think we can make. And I think that they're constructive, and I know that these are things that you can improve on. And as we continue to move forward in these presentations, they will continue to get better just as you already have so far this semester. So now let me talk a little bit about, let me step back and say to you, what is your expectation in terms of, now that you've heard all of the 13 presentations, what do you think Al is going to take away? We are hoping that he will be here in about 10 or 15 minutes, and that he will have a chance to hear the top 4 presentations, and that he'll be able to tell you that. But based on what you've seen so far from both your groups and your competitors' groups, what do you think he's going to say, and why? What's he going to say? Thank you. I already knew that. What do you think? What? Can I have the 10 other cities? I absolutely agree with you. Why is he going to say that? I think that's absolutely correct. He's going to want to say, I want to see the other cities, and I want to see the other cities. Why? He liked your research, and what he liked and will like is that you all, particularly on San Francisco, every single group did different methodologies, and yet every single group came to the same conclusion. So what more could you ask for than, in the case of San Francisco, 6 totally different looks at the same information, all coming to the same conclusion? Phenomenal help, and exactly why I believe that he will ask you for more, just as he has already asked you for more. Okay, so that's why I think you've done a great job. You've done a great job because independently you've pretty much come to the same conclusion, and even in the Chicago analyses that pretty much came to the same conclusion, not unanimously, but pretty much the same. So for next week, pending him, of course, coming and saying, no, I want you to do something else. He's the client. We always listen to him. We do whatever the hell he wants. 2 things for you to think about for next week. Number 1, very impressed with the way that you all responded to the need for a matrix. You did great work on the matrix. A couple of your groups did not do matrices. I know that that will change next week. But when we do the future matrices, please remember to do 2 things. One of them is to make sure that all of the information that we have analyzed during the semester so far gets put into the matrix, even if you either weight it very little or choose for whatever reason not to weight it at all. We want all of the data to be considered by every group. You want to do more, so like one of the last presentations even brought additional information and weighted it, fine. But let's make sure that everybody is using at minimum the same information. So some of you already did incorporate, in fact, all of the kinds of things that we wanted you to do for next week. So you got a little bit ahead of yourselves. Congratulations. So if you were to go to your syllabus, not at the moment, but if you looked at what we wanted you to do for the 10 market presentation, what we want you to do is to make sure that you did do the mosaic population, and I think just about everybody did do that. Bloomberg terminals, so we're going to have to get that information for you. Regardless of how you weight that number, it is one of the things that you need to consider. A third thing is demographic detail. Most of you have done that. Listenership by market, you've done that. Available signals by market, done that. Commuting time, and then create a matrix. So I would say, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 at the most, everybody is using all of the information that we're asking you to do. So, with the caveat that Al wants to change things, what we would like you to do for next week is exactly what we were on plan to do, which is now give me the 10 markets. So, how are we going to do that? We're going to do that because, in fact, most of you have already done 4, right? We've done Boston, we've done New York, we've done Chicago, and we've done San Francisco. All you need to do is 6 more. How are you going to do those 6? How are you going to pick what, in fact, are the next 6 markets, given where we are today, given the information that you've gleaned so far in the course? And that, I would suggest, means that you're probably going to have to look at some key data that you've already weighted as very high, and then look at the other major markets in the United States and start with those markets that, in fact, look like, based on a few of the criteria, will be the highest rated. You, by the end of the semester, will change the top 10 markets. And the reason that you'll change the top 10 markets is we will be adding 2 other pieces of crucial information to the mix. We'll be adding to the matrices some other crucial pieces of final information. One of those, which we'll address after this assignment, is that of sales. And the last piece, which we will add after the sales piece, is the break-even piece. So what you've got so far is a continued build, and as we build, our credibility increases. As we build, your recommendations get stronger. There, by the way, as an aside, is absolutely no reason, based on the quality of the work that you have done, that any group needs to say we need to do more research. Besides that being the traditional MBA cop-out You don't need to take that. You guys have already done work that is sufficiently superior, in my opinion, that you don't ever have to say, I'm sorry, I don't have enough. And by the way, that's not what you were asked to do. You were asked to give me a recommendation. And so the recommendation does not have a little star by it which says, and I'll get back to you next week after I do some more work. You guys don't need to take that cop out. Your work is absolutely fantastic the way it is. Just keep on going. So what's going to happen is you're going to come up with some more markets. I have no clue what those are. I don't know whether Miami's in there or Miami isn't. I don't know whether Washington's in there or Washington isn't in there. But what you will do for next week is you will probably want to look at maybe 6, 7, 8 additional markets, and then you will take those, let's call it 8 additional markets, and take the best 6 of those and put them, again, horizontally against the 4 that you've already done. So that we will then have groups that will not only have the criteria that are the same, we'll have weightings which will be different based on your own particular group's perception of what's important and what isn't important. And then we'll have the ultimate outcome, which is here's the ranking of markets. So here's New York. Maybe Boston's going to be 4th or 5th. Maybe Chicago is going to be 3rd. Maybe San Francisco will be 2nd. I don't know, you don't know, but that's the value here. The value is that we're starting with some givens. That would be New York and now Boston. We've added to that what you've done this week, which is San Francisco and Chicago. And now you've got a free-for-all, which is, okay, go out and find the other 6 that you think are in the top 10. Yeah. That is a superb question. And the answer is, forget it. Forget what he's said. He has said to us things like, we'll never go to Miami, or something like that. You know what? You may very well tell him that that's absolutely wrong. And by the way, in case you don't remember, he loves to be told he's wrong. Isn't that right, Megan? Right? As a matter of fact, he loves Megan. He loves Megan because it's not my fault. We all do. We all love Megan. Okay, because she tells all of us we're wrong. Okay, that's cool, Megan. At any rate, so don't, like you have so far this semester, don't constrain yourself at all. Go for whatever you think is right. Go for whatever you think the numbers lead you to. Support whatever your recommendations are and give us a 10 through 1 in terms of order of importance. And for all we know, maybe New York isn't going to be number 1. I don't know. It all depends on what you all come up with and what your all perceptions are in terms of the importance of various weightings. Okay? Any other questions? But that's a great question. Yeah. You'll use exactly the same criteria as you did this week. No new information, but making sure that all the information to date. So we'll have a level playing field from all groups. And then, as I said, we'll add to that sales, we'll add to that break even, and then the ultimate top 10. Okay, questions? Other questions at all? Time limit, the usual. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wait. I'm sorry? Time accepted, yeah. So, look, you all are working on additional information. There's no reason why you can't, in your presentation next week, review quickly the criteria and the weighting. And obviously, those of you who have used both percentages and absolute numbers are taking the right approach to this, because as we talked about last week, you need both. And after you review your methodologies, explain where it came out and what the numbers are. Okay? Sound reasonable? Sound something that we can do? Yeah? Okay, other questions? Comments? Okay, so this Sunday is what's called Bentley Open House. For those of you who have been around a few years, and may have even been an undergraduate here, you may remember that in the fall, we usually have a large open house, and the purpose of that is to try to find folks who would like to make application as undergraduates in the class of 2018. On Sunday, the folks from Bloomberg have been kind enough to not only send a lot of swag, but they are also going to do a live broadcast from Bentley in the morning. We would like volunteers for folks like yourself who would be willing to spend an hour or two at the table. We'll call it the Bloomberg table. It's at the top of Smith, and I can give you the details, to be able to, as our visitors come and listen to the broadcast or see what we're doing in these corporate immersion classes, and specifically what we're doing with Bloomberg Radio, if anybody would be interested in, particularly in the time period from 11:30 on Sunday morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 11:30 to 2, if you have an interest, would you just send me an email and say that you might be interested, and I'll get back to you. And we would be most appreciative if some of you might like to be at that table and be able to tell some of our visitors what it's like to be in one of these classes. We will, of course, ask Al specifically how, given our NDAs, what he will feel comfortable allowing us to talk about, and on the other hand, what he'd rather we didn't. At minimum, we know we can talk about something called future business plans, right? I mean, that's as euphemistic as you can possibly get. But we'll check with him. We'd love for any of you who have that availability on Sunday from 11:30 to 2, we'll be happy to feed you, give you all kinds of swag, etc., if that's of interest, and we'd be most appreciative. Any other questions? Sir. Less than 10 minutes away here. The check is in the mail. Is that right? So the judges, are you going to come up and give us a little information on who the top two choices are?
Yeah, we're ready to declare. So for the San Francisco market is Team 6 from my group and Team 3 from Pooley's group for San Francisco.
And so we're not going to differentiate between who came in first and who came in second. We're just going to call those as the top two finalists, and then we'll present to Al, and we'll let Al make the final decision along with comments on both. And the other market, sir.
Chicago is Team 1 from Michael's group, and Team 1 from Michael.
1 and 1. All right. So all four groups understand exactly who will be presenting. Congratulations to all of you. Al should be here, I would say, pretty soon. Would any of our judges like to make any comments or add anything? Peter? Our senior judge.
Just a couple quick thoughts on presentation. I think the comment was made after the last class that, hey guys, put the, state the conclusion up front. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And I think only two groups did that. One was, and it was the most interesting one was the yes but, because I thought that was, the but was like, oh, okay, so now I'm really interested in finding out what the but
I think there were two groups that actually I said, we'll let you decide, not so much. And the other one came up with no conclusion, and I just don't think that's right. The other thing is just basic PowerPoint skills. Animation is death, I find. And, the people like to add all kinds of animation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Things that are continuously animating while you're talking to the slide, I find very distracting. And we had a big discussion at my old company about, we're just going to kill animation because it's not helpful to the presentation. The other thing is just make sure that people can read your slides. It's really hard sometimes if you're reversing out of a black slide, and if you don't have the type and the color that's light enough, it's unreadable. There were some nice reversed out of black slides where you really put this in. So there's always the exception to the rule. And that's about it. So those are just some tips.
I just have one comment, and it's two words: informed insight. So I do work a lot with vendors, I brand companies, I work with a lot of research, and you guys have a lot of tools at your disposal, mosaic, heat maps, and it's all good. But I think what Al Mayers is looking for anyone in that position is informed insight. So taking the data and drawing conclusions. I think one in particular started to talk about revenue. Al cares dearly about ad revenue. So someone listened and filled that out, and that was who I gave the highest score to, because you can use the tools till the cows come home, the analysis and the colors, but the idea is for you to add your perspective. He's looking at you as a target market, a young audience that's going to have different insights than he does, and sort of takes out the kind of an unbiased eye to things. So I would just keep that in. What else did you want to do?
Real relationship and things coming up. We've got some.
Yeah, so I'm the Phil. I can do stand-up. I actually worked with Second City when I lived in Chicago a little bit. The thing that's going on with Bloomberg is we've decided to carry on probably a longer-term relationship with them. Boston is a test, a pilot for us both. We feel good about that with Bloomberg yesterday, talking about maybe some additional content that we could work with them on, new markets. They're going to be here, as Terry said, Sunday, but they're going to be here also on October 11th doing a live telecast from the trading room. And Gloria Larson, our president, will co-host the Hayes Advantage from 10 to 2. And we're going to have hopefully a lot of students dropping in. They want a lot of activity. Radio is such, you want noise. They like a lot of commerce happening next to the mic. So we'll probably send out a reminder to the campus about that. We are going to launch new research called the Preparedness Study that we're doing nationally at the Bloomberg Business Summit in Chicago on November 20th. And Gloria will be hosting a panel with in front of a number of CEOs from across the country. Charles Schwab will be there, Madeleine Albright, President of American Airlines, at the Art Institute. And that'll be a 55-minute live broadcast on Bloomberg Radio. Probably get a little bit of TV coverage if we're lucky. So sort of this fall is kind of a big step where we go deeper with them, and then we look into the new calendar year for things we can do in new markets, potentially like San Francisco with the mountains go here. So for us, it's a content and a marketing relationship. Our faculty are to be featured. Perry will be interviewed on Sunday. We have already a long lineup on October 11th. So I'm watching all this closely too, because I'm looking at the numbers closely to see, is this a good investment? And here's Al. All right, I'm going to tell a couple of jokes. Two guys walk in, no? Okay. Two guys walk in from Route 128 and review presentations.
So Al, thank you very much. We know you've been, yeah, that's right. We know you've been held captive in a cellar. So while you have been having fun, we have also. We've gone through the 13 presentations. 6 of those are on San Francisco, 7 on Chicago. The class and judges have met and chosen the top 2 presentations from each. And with your permission, what we'd like to do is to have the top 2 presenters from San Francisco and then the top 2 presenters from Chicago, and we would love your reaction to those at the end. Does that sound all right to you? Yes. Terrific. Which would you like?
Let's do San Fran first. Let's do Team 6, my section, and then Team 3.
Hello, everyone. We are still Team 6. We're going to stand up here. Yay! 10 new markets for next week. So exciting! Hello, Al. How's it going? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll explain all that after.
Okay. All right, so hello everyone. Thanks for sticking around. We're still Team 6, and this past week we decided to look into San Francisco as a market for Bloomberg Radio. So first off, let's talk about the Power Elite. Now the Power Elite is Bloomberg's target market, and we have to keep that in mind. So the Power Elite as a whole, they are Bloomberg Radio's listeners. Bloomberg Radio fits into their lifestyle. And we took that into consideration when we were doing our research, and we hope that you do the same during this presentation. So let's first look at our weighted matrix. So we constructed this for New York City, San Francisco, and Boston. And based on the scores that we gave, we found that San Francisco, their attractiveness to Bloomberg was in between Boston and New York. The way we weighted it, we chose mosaic concentrations and income to be more important than radio competition and commute time based on the 2 things that Perry touched on last week. One being high incomes. So we looked at the ranges of 250 to 499,000 and over 500,000. And the second one being target market purchasing power. Now we looked into the household incomes for the 3 cities at those 2 ranges we talked about, and we noticed that San Francisco has a much higher number of households that have these incomes than Boston. So what does that mean? San Francisco has more purchasing power, more money to spend than Boston, and Bloomberg Radio is already in Boston.
So as far as U.S. listenership goes, Arbitron tells us that San Francisco is number 4 in the U.S. radio market, which ranks 6 spots ahead of Boston. Which means all else being equal, if Bloomberg is happy being in Boston, they will also be happy in San Francisco. However, as we know, all else isn't equal, so we wanted to analyze the competition in the San Francisco market. So what we did was we took the existing radio stations in San Francisco and broke them down by format. All those that did not have a similar format to Bloomberg, we immediately eliminated, and we looked at the remaining stations and we analyzed their content. Again, all those that were not similar to Bloomberg, we immediately eliminated. We were left with about 7, and we analyzed the signal strength. Those that had competitive signal strength, we kept in the mix. From there, we identified the top 3, which we thought would be the biggest competitors to Bloomberg. These all have a similar format, a similar content, and competitive signal strength.
Signal strength, what do you mean? Do you mean audience size, coverage share, or?
Just the area it covers. And from there, we found 4 lesser competitors who we thought, although the format was similar, the content wasn't quite the same, but we still thought that some Power Elite people would be attracted to these stations.
All right. Arbitron states that the average commute into San Francisco is 27.4 minutes, and it also says that most commuters are leaving home between 7 and 8 a.m. As we talked about last week, the average commute time isn't very accurate because it doesn't take into consideration traffic. And as Ali stated before, we still want to focus on the Power Elite. Therefore, we took cities from Forbes 2012 list of most expensive zip codes, and then we went to Google Maps at 7:30 a.m. Western time and got directions from these cities into San Francisco, and that generated an estimated commute time with the given traffic that these commuters will most likely be faced with. And what does this tell us? Nothing that we already don't know. The average commuters for the affluent cities surrounding San Francisco it's going to be longer than expected, meaning that they have a longer time to listen to Bloomberg Radio.
So in order to determine the signal strength that would satisfy San Francisco market, we decided to look at our target market concentration. So what we found out is that a Power Elite is concentrated in the northeast of San Francisco, as well as affluent areas in the south, east, and north. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that our signal has to be strong enough to cover this entire area, which is approximately a 55-mile range. So in order to validate this, we decided to compare this to our competitors. So as we can see, the signal strength is pretty comparable.
So, sure. What are you looking at here?
Where Sacramento is?
Sacramento is northeast.
So how far east do we get?
How far is direct
It's
east?
50 miles from San Francisco.
Short of Tracy?
55.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fun. So we decided to translate our goal into a question. Is what? Oh, yeah. Is San Francisco? Just go for it. All right, so shut that phone off. We're good here. Let's talk about life. So the question here that we derive from this is San Francisco a good fit for Bloomberg Radio? If we look at our matrix from the initial slides, San Francisco falls in between New York and Boston in terms of the values we assign to it, which is good for San Francisco. If we look at the competition, it's a little bit stiffer in San Francisco than it is in New York in terms of the direct content competitors, because there are 3 of those, whereas there were no direct content competitors in New York. The total competitors, or the total competitive landscape, was similar in the 2 cities, with Boston having fewer competitors, so Boston is actually in better shape due to that. If we look at commute time, it's similar in all the different areas, so due to that, I mean, the ear space there, or the ear time, is pretty equal between all of those. And as long as Bloomberg in San Francisco can get a signal that's competitive in terms of radius, as the two or 3 nearest competitors, it should be fine. So, returning to this, using Boston as a benchmark, is San Francisco a good fit for Bloomberg Radio? Yes. And the animation works here, right? All right, thanks guys.
All right. I'm going to assume that everyone's still doing well. I am still doing well. So for our analysis, we created a matrix of weighted metrics that allowed us to compare New York, San Francisco, and Boston. And these metrics were market size, which we weighted at 5%, population characteristics, which we weighted at 25%, commuting information at 30%, and income at 40%. So for each category, we'll display the top ranked city on the right-hand side of the slides. We'll highlight it for you. And as we mentioned last week, the number of listeners a radio station has is a very important metric to decipher the success of that radio station. And therefore, bigger cities have larger potentials for retaining their current listeners and acquiring more new listeners. And as you can see, San Francisco is between Boston and New York in this category, with New York in the lead.
So, 3 areas that capture key attributes of Bloomberg Radio's current target audience. In terms of both age distribution and white-collar worker proportion, San Francisco comes ahead. Also, last week we mentioned that power elite households are really important for Bloomberg Radio. In this case, San Francisco comes second after New York and ahead of Boston, and captures 8% of the power elite households. So out of the 3 cities, we decided that San Francisco comes as the best match.
So according to Arbitron data, New York has the most commuting time, and San Francisco has the least. So as we mentioned last week, Ibis World report cites that total vehicle miles are the key economic driver of the radio broadcasting industry. And that's because more mileage means more time spent in a car and leads to more time dedicated in radio listening. And we also think that driving alone is an important factor because it's
it has greater potential that the people in the car will turn on radio instead of distracted by others. So that's why we think it's important. So overall, we think that time people spend in the car is the most important and more important than the other factors that distance traveled and whether or not the commuters are travel alone or not. So therefore, we weighted average time heavier than the other factors that leading New York to stand out for commuting.
So I think it's very clear, and we've definitely done it today, we stress the importance of advertising to Bloomberg. We've all done it over the last 3 weeks, since we've also stressed the importance of disposable income and its relationship to advertising. So what we did this week, we decided to take a different approach. We tried to evaluate income in a different order, so we wanted to give a quantitative picture of who has the most disposable income and what that has to do with advertising. So what we did is we looked at 4 critical factors: average household expenditures, cost of living, income above $150,000, and where the top 5% of household incomes live in the United States. What we found, surprisingly, was New York actually was at the bottom of 3 of these categories and scored comparable to Boston in the 4th. Interestingly, San Francisco was at the top in all 4 categories. San Francisco had the highest number of people making $150,000 and above annually. They also had, of that 5% of the top household incomes, 13% of that 5% lived in San Francisco. This is not surprising since the cost of living in San Francisco is the cheapest among these 3 cities. These people, because they had the lower cost of living and made more money, had more disposable income and tended to spend more and had more average household expenditure. So what does this mean? It means people in San Francisco make more money, they spend more money, which is what advertisers want to see.
All right, Bloomberg is realistically only considering the nation's largest metros, so size only carried a small weight of 5%. Next, we considered population characteristics as 25% of our matrix. These characteristics help define Bloomberg Radio's current target consumer, and cities with higher proportions of such characteristics would likely be better matches. San Francisco was the winner in this category. Our second most important factor was commuting, weighing in at 30%. Daily commutes allow an opportune time for radio listening and time to be influenced by radio advertising. Due to a lengthy average commute, New York came out ahead in this area. Our most heavily weighted factor was income at 40%, due to its impact on disposable income and thus potential to drive advertising revenue. San Francisco outperformed in every area of this category. After factoring in the weights of the different criteria in our matrix, which we've attached in your handouts, San Francisco actually came out ahead of both Boston and New York as a match for Bloomberg Radio.
Chicago, known for the Sears Tower, but we have a little fun fact that lions can actually jump higher than the Sears Tower. And it turns out the Sears Tower can't jump very high.
Almost as good the second. Oh, God. Okay, guys. Okay, yes. Not yet. So we're Team 1, as we said, and we did our comparative market analysis on Chicago, which, like I said, Windy City and also home of the deep dish delicious pizza. So we started our matrix with just a few key topics that we have been discussing the last few weeks, being population, income over 200K, and we did this for Chicago, Boston, and New York. And like we said, we didn't necessarily think that the percentages were telling the right story, so we changed it to the absolute numbers just to find out exactly how many ears and wallets we were getting in both cities. We also decided that New York is going to be kind of like the top of the range, not necessarily the goal, but just that would be something to aim for, and Boston is going to be the bottom since they're just breaking even. We want any city that we enter into to be somewhere in the middle of those 2 cities.
So as Alice mentioned, wealth of a city is an extremely important factor in determining whether Bloomberg should enter a city because it determines whether radio listeners will respond to the advertising that Bloomberg airs. A measure that we used for wealth was the buying power index, and we used New York as the baseline. We used the median salary of New York in addition to the cost of living to get a buying power index of 1, which we compared Chicago and Boston to. In order to get the numbers for Chicago and Boston, we used their respective median salaries in addition to the amount of money required to match the New York City buying power. And that gave us a buying power index for Chicago and Boston of about 1.6, with Chicago being slightly higher. What this means is that for every dollar spent in Chicago and Boston, you can get about 1.6 more than you could get in New York, which is definitely a good sign in terms of how much money people have to spend for things like advertising. So because the wealth is so important, we decided to use the BPI in our matrix, which we later added weights to.
Okay, so as we all know at this point, the majority of people who do listen to radio do so in their car. So it's important for Bloomberg to be in a market where people drive to work and do so by themselves. And you can see that about 70% of people in Chicago do both. And also, Chicago is the number 3 in terms of metro population, so when we combine those two facts, we were able to conclude that there should be a solid listener base in the Chicago market. And moving on to our matrix, we took out the total population numbers because we applied for each of the categories the percentage to them, and we felt that this would be a better way to analyze all 3 of the cities together. Next, Levi is going to go into greater detail.
So as Mike was saying, well, first we had to add in the commuting time or commuting percentages, but then we applied this population levels to each of the percentages to get absolute values, and then we had to apply weights to each category in accordance with importance. In line with what Al told us last week, and Bloomberg effectively told us the first week, income is very important in determining the listener base. We gave them 30%, followed by the number of people who commute alone, which is the primary time when Bloomberg radio is going to be listened to. Then we normalized everything so we had the same units across the board. We set New York as the base, and set all those values to 1, and divided the rest of the other cities by New York's values to get effective New York units for each city. Applied the weights, got some scores, added them up, pull out the abacus, and New York gets a score of 100, which is the ideal. Boston's at 53, which tells us that's about break even, and Chicago's comfortably in the middle at 72.5. So the numbers look good, but before we can dive in, let's hear from Omar about the competitive atmosphere.
Thank you, Levi. So we listed out all the different radio stations, and there's about 80 radio stations in the greater Chicago area. We eliminated anything that did not that wasn't talk radio or news radio. And then we dove deeper into these and checked their websites, mission statements, and see which were not really related to Bloomberg. And we discovered there's 5 different potential competitors, and one which is a real potential competitor. Another thing we looked into is available signals. There's not really any available signals. The FCC has recently stopped accepting any signals, any applications for signals. So Bloomberg has to do one of 2 things: lease a existing signal, which is a silent signal, which there's only one within the Chicago area, or buy out a smaller radio station and use its asset towards Bloomberg. So to conclude, Chicago does seem to be as a potential place to invest. However, Bloomberg has to overcome some obstacles before it could enjoy that piece of deep dish pizza. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kashu Doji, and this is my team, Team 1, Adam Sparling, Kashyap, Chi, Marcus, and Adam Hammond in the back there. Today the question is whether Bloomberg should go into the Chicago market. We have divided our presentation into the criteria in our matrix, and each criteria is weighted based on its importance, and each city will have a score from 1 to 5, and I'm going to hand it over to Adam to talk about our multi-graphics.
Thanks, Kachi. So to determine whether Chicago is a feasible market for Bloomberg to enter, we took a step back and we looked at the same demographics and psychographics we looked at with Boston and New York, specifically the socioeconomic status of the population in those 2 cities. As you can see, Chicago ranks 3rd as far as household incomes over $250,000. It's not a good sign to start. Next, we went and looked at the psychographics, the power elite. This is the target market for Bloomberg Radio. Chicago actually ranks 2nd in this area with 7.5% of their population fitting into this category. So in order to break the tie, we had to look at other factors. One of which we looked at was the percentage of their population working in financial services, which was significantly higher in Chicago than in Boston. So that with other variables, we decided to place Chicago as the middle ranking in this category. Kashyap is going to discuss the competitive factors moving forward for Bloomberg if they go to Chicago.
How did you define financial services?
It was all financial services, so whether you were doing portfolio management or investment banking or
And percentage that was higher than Boston or
raw number.
3% higher than Boston.
It was 3% higher than Boston, as a percentage, yes, population.
Thanks, Adam. In terms of the competition, so what we see over here was we decided to shortlist a number of talk or news AM, FM radio channels in all the three cities, and this is what we find out. In Chicago, there are 14 of them. In Boston, there are 7, and in New York, there are 15. So as you can see that the competition is really high, not as high as it is in New York, but more than it is in Boston. So in this case, Chicago was in the middle. Another thing which we considered was, in this case, we've not taken into consideration podcasts or satellite radio because they can be available from all the three geographical regions. So in terms of the competition, Chicago was in the middle, and that's why we gave it a 3. Now Chi's going to talk about signals.
Thank you, Kashyap. Since we already know the potential competition in Chicago City could be high, we took the signal map from the most popular news talk and the second place of the most popular in general radio station, which is CBS Radio. As you can see, the signal is really strong enough to cover a great areas, not only the Chicago City. And of course, that is only with one radio tower. What does that tell us? So of course, to be as competitive as CBS, Bloomberg probably need to have a signal as strong as CBS. But at the same time, with such a strong signal, the Bloomberg will easily to target its client also with the only one radio tower. The cost to enter this market could be lower, which makes Chicago a favorable location for Bloomberg. And that's bringing to the commuter analysis to Marcus.
Thank you. So, Chicago loves cars. At least that's the impression we can get when we look at the data. I mean, if you look at Chicago, the red bars, 80% of people go to work by car if you add the people up who drive alone and to carpool. Case closed? Not really. There's also 2 million individual public transportation rides every day. So that's a fact we cannot ignore if Bloomberg decides to go into into Chicago, sorry. So how do those numbers add up? The thing is, a lot of people take their car to a subway station or a commuter rail station and take the public transportation into the city. This is a good factor for Bloomberg, where they can actually go into the market by offering a door-to-door solution for those people. Just imagine you take the car to the station. In the car, you listen to Bloomberg radio on your car radio. Then you go out, you take out your headphones, put them into your ears, and tune into Bloomberg with the app, seamlessly just going on. And now Adam will wrap it up for us.
Thanks, Marcus. So here at the bottom of each slide so far, in all 4 of our criteria, you've been able to tell our rankings, and we put them all here, multiplied them by their weights, and had a weighted total at the bottom. But the problem with this matrix that we have is both multigraphics and commuters were measured as percentages, and that doesn't tell the whole picture. We also want to look at the hard numbers in each of the cities. So for example, our percentages won't tell the whole story necessarily. For example, the greatest little city in the world, which I was proud to share with the class earlier, is Fayetteville, Arkansas, has 80,000 people. So you could get 100% of the population of Fayetteville, Arkansas to listen, and that's the equivalent of 1/2 of 1% in New York City. So we went back, redid the same table with the nominal values. And so we have the percentage and nominal together, because we think both are important in making the final decision, to create a final weighted total, where we see New York in first place, Chicago a close second, and Boston a distant third. So using Boston as that benchmark, if Bloomberg's happy here in Boston, we think they should definitely enter the Chicago market as well. Thank you.
My new boss, because if anybody has been following, Bloomberg named the new CEO of media a couple weeks ago, and he started this week, a gentleman named Justin Smith from the Atlantic Group. And he's a strategic thinker. And he called a meeting this morning at 8 o'clock. So I'm thinking, do I skip the first meeting or do I show up? And I'm thinking, I'll show up for this meeting. I said, but this is great. I looked at the train schedule. scheduled for an hour. Even if we're a little late, I can still get down to Penn Station by the 10 o'clock train and be up here at 1:26. My friend Dave Hemingway, who's our partner here in getting Bentley and Bloomberg together, agreed to meet me at the train station and pick me up. So I figured 1:26, 20 minutes up, 1:28 and here. And unfortunately, there was a power outage feeding a line into Grand Central Station that knocked out most of the train traffic in Lower Connecticut, and that just kind of messed up everything. So we were going for a diesel train, and then they had to add another train after we pulled out of the station. So two stops for about an hour and a half before we even got going. So I apologize for that, but these presentations were great, despite sitting on the train. The thing that I will caution you is I was kind of a little data overload when you throw up too many numbers. So when I look at things like the heat graph and things like that, it told a better story. And when I look as a whole, I think the very first presentation, Team 1, told a really good story and was my winner for the day. Congratulations. The first team that went. Okay. Followed by the second team, followed by the fourth team, and then the third team in that order. But they were all very close, within 8 points. So anyway, nice job. A couple of things that I was kind of looking at. We talked about station coverage, okay? And I asked the question, I didn't mean to interrupt, but how did we determine the station coverage? I mean, just based on geography, you came up with numbers though at the bottom? I guess that's what I want to know.
Like the actual radius
Yeah.
putting up there. So there's a website that shows if you put station IDs in there, it'll give you what their coverage area is. So for AM stations, there's 3 different levels based on time of day. So if you go to there, you can put competitors in, see where they reach to, and so we made the assumptions based on that. I'm assuming most are these.
Okay, the important thing you want to factor in on that is, again, and this is where the heat maps will go very well, to the people that we want to reach live in that area. Because if they live within the areas that have smaller signals, it's okay, And I think that's pretty evident in the station that we're kind of narrowing in on in San Francisco, and this particular map. I was trying to figure out how far east you were going. That's why I asked the question, but we clearly cover it, so that's good. Also, AM versus FM in particular. San Francisco has a lot of hills, and the FM stations in a lot of places don't work as well. So there are more spoken word formats and more viable AM stations in San Francisco than some of the other markets because of that geographical limitation. So we want to factor that in. And also, don't get too hung up on the available stations. You tell me where they live, that's important, and I'll find the station. So, because there's a lot of reasons, including the CBS station that they were highlighting in Chicago there. I'd love to have that one, but there's no way we can afford to have it. So, it just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, good job overall. A couple of slides that what I'll do is I'll study a little bit more, and then next week I'll highlight as what I thought really told a great story for the 4 groups here. And then the last thing I just wanted to point out, because I know it's late, but Megan really, I was thinking a lot about, again, what we talked about last week in competition. And I stated the first class that it almost sounds very arrogant that we don't have a competitor. And in a lot of ways, I've tried to articulate that from a format standpoint, we don't. Nobody is doing anything similar to that. When you then look at the business elements and who we sell advertising to, unfortunately, we end up selling more advertising that you're going to hear on the NPR stations or people that generally don't do radio. So it's also hard to say that we have a competitor there, but in Boston and New York, there are stations that you can say, yes, we do compete with. But then finally, because I want to give you a very clear picture as to what I worry about, is the competition is really time, especially when they get in the car. What are they doing in there? Are they, because we established last week, 5 years ago, 95% of the people were using the AM FM radio, and now it's like 84% in that short period of time. I don't know what it's going to be like 5 and 10 years from now. It's probably going to be less because there's going to be more options on there. So how they use it, why they use it, it's like, was it the last presentation talked about going from your car to the app? Sort of, it's a great idea. Whether you guys will do that or not, I don't know. It's a lot of work to ask somebody to do that. You really have to make a great impact on them, on people, to say, I'm either not going to leave the car or not to worry, I'll put my earphone in and, you know, grab it on the phone on the rest of the commute home, or to work, I mean. So really, let's really focus in on the competition while we're listening. We talked about before that this is a free medium. You know, all you have to do is have the hardware, you turn it on, you don't have to pay a fee every month. So it's easy for people to pick up and leave because there's no great loyalty to it. So those are things we want to factor in. And other than that, that's all I have today. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Yep.
So you say you don't really want a data overload, so next week we have to do 10 cities. Would you want us to like tell you the 10 cities and then narrow it down to ones that are actually worth your time in our views, or how do you want to?
I think the data is good to support it, but just kind of hit it with a bullet point. You know, that's why, again, the heat map I use as an example, I can quickly look at that and get so much data in one slide.
And are you an animation fan?
Whatever tells the story, yeah, I thought it was kind of cool getting that little thing together there at the end. You know, I don't know whether it's been used a lot. Also, the silly joke did work too, you know, I mean, anybody else? No? That's it? All right, well, thank you very much, everybody.